The Australian Grand Prix is here, Phillip Island, my favourite weekend of the year. Well, in terms of body clock wise, it's not my favourite, but it's worth it. I think in the end, it's probably the most iconic MotoGP track. I think from when I grew up. I don't know about the other two, but we'll let them speak about that in terms of waking up and watching MotoGP at like 4 in the morning. It's always a really good thing. Yeah, straight into this weekend, Marc Marquez. If you're not really checking the news, he isn't going to be here. He's missing the next 2 rounds at Phillip Island and Sepang. He has got surgery this morning on a shoulder blade, so yeah, that's just came in from Ducati as we're recording. And I just want to read the statement here. Yeah, after a checkup on his right shoulder blade, Marc Marquez has undergone successful operation in Madrid. It's the same medical team who evaluated him 7 days ago. And blah 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 blah. Some of residual instability. It was decided to go with a surgery instead in the shoulder, so that's to repair the ligaments. It seems so. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to change the timeline. Ducati just said that the Mark's recovering is normal and he's looking to progress with his recovery timeline. So whether that makes a difference, whether they realize 7 days later he needed it, it's just one of those things. But yeah, that's a surprise that it's happened a week after instead of pretty much instantly. But there you go, Marc Marquez update, another one for you. Pete, what do you make of that?
Well, the first thing that jumps into my head is Maverick Vinales. You know, he's come off surgery for shoulder ligaments, and we're seeing how long that takes. And you know, I think it's going to be having surgery means it's going to be a lot longer. I think the recovery period than perhaps, you know, if they were thinking they could get away with basically some rest and sort of recuperation and therapy and that kind of thing. But if you have surgery on ligaments, as we've seen with Maverick, and then it can be a big job. And obviously, Mark's had shoulder surgeries before, hasn't he, for the dislocations? And I mean, he would time them, wouldn't he, for the start of basically he would finish the test session, wouldn't he, after the final race, and basically go straight to the hospital to give himself the maximum amount of recovery time for the Sepang test, the following end of January, start of February. You know, normally those sort of operations, ligaments, they're a couple of months to get right. So I think, yeah, it definitely, you know, it's going to be extend the recovery period, shall we say. And I should think all eyes are Mark are going to be on the Valencia test and being back for that. I think it probably puts a lot more doubt on Portimao, to be honest. This surgery, especially given the physical nature of Portimao as well. And it's not been a particularly good track for him. And it's probably not a particularly good testing track if we take his word about already thinking about 26 and that kind of thing. You know, it's almost a bit of a Phillip Island, really, isn't it, Portimao? So it's kind of a bit of a unique track, and I think well, we'll probably won't see Mark until Valencia. Actually, having heard what you've said there.
Jorge Martin isn't going to be here. Maverick Vinales isn't going to be here. As Pete said to me before recording, the whole front row from last year is completely missing, which makes it really unpredictable for who's going to have a really... I mean, who's going to win this weekend? We don't know. The weather, the wind, the animals. It's so unpredictable. Yeah, Phillip Island, I love it, but it's also like one of those chaotic weekends on the calendar. Pete, just in terms of memories of Phillip Island, what do you have? Because it's such an iconic place. Mick Doohan, Wayne Gardner, Casey Stoner. I mean, when the home riders come here, they do perform, don't they?
They do, yeah. I mean, it's almost every single year is eventful for one reason or another, isn't it, at Phillip Island? And I don't know, yeah, for me, you think Phillip Island, you think back to that run of victories that Casey Stoner had, the way that he would ride, sliding around Stoner Corner, as it is now called, isn't it? You know, just incredible. It's a place where a rider can really make a difference, isn't it? And you add in the scenery of the place, just the layout of the track, the old school nature of it. It's a unique weekend. It's just special all around, and yeah, it always throws up drama, excitement, all of the above, doesn't it? And good racing, most importantly, as well. So yeah, there's been loads of those. You know, the Ian Only Seagull headbutt is always one that people remember, isn't it? But you could look back at almost any event and find something special about it. You know, we're heading into, it was the first, just small things, like it was the first place where the Aprilia RSGP led a race, wasn't it?
That's
led
right.
a lap in 2019, and that was such a big thing then. I remember it was sort of big headlines of, you know, all 5 manufacturers, as I think it was then, have now led a race lap, and then We didn't know it at the time, but Sepang was a week later, and that was where he would fail the anti-doping test. That we would find out some months later. There's just all these things, even things that don't seem that consequential. When you look back, they had a sort of a big effect, and they all come back to Phillip Island. So yeah, and as you say, we go into this weekend. I think as one of the most open weekends since probably Marc got injured in 2020. Marc's got a great record around Phillip Island. The way he's been riding this year, you would have almost nailed on 2 wins for him this weekend if he was fit and riding. Instead, he's out injured. The front row, as you say, from last year are not going to be there with Vinales and Martin. You've got Pecco, who we don't know, is it going to be Motegi Pecco this weekend? Is it going to be Mandalika Pecco this weekend? We've got Bez, who looked incredibly fast with the twisty sort of flowing sections at Mandalika, which people thought is a good sign for Phillip Island. But he's probably going to almost certainly going to have a penalty to serve in the race, so he will have to overcome that. Really, really hard to sort of predict, isn't it? I think probably on the grid there's Zarco and Rins are the only guys who have won Grand Prix, at Phillip Island, heading into this weekend, shall we say? So yeah, it's always worth it, isn't it? Phillip Island, worth getting up for, as you say, the drama, the unpredictability, and I'm sure this weekend will be more of the same.
It absolutely is. Lewis, memories of it going back. I mean, you can go back in the early era of MotoGP. People often bring up Rossi 2003 on the Repsol Honda after he got the penalty, and then he just said, right, let's show him what we can do. And he pulled out I forget what the gap was in the end, 15 seconds or something. And then a few of his title wins have came here. Casey Stoner, as Pete says, 2015, which we'll cover in a few weeks. But it's a really good circuit, isn't it? And it's just the character of the place is just really old school, as Pete says.
Yeah, I mean, it's a masterclass in what circuit design should be. I think we've come off the back of kind of a run recently of not super interesting sort of newer circuits, let's say Mandalika, Balatton Park. All have that same sort of kind of stop go 90-degree corners, a few chicanes sort of thrown in, and flat. Flat. You look at all the new circuits we've had over the last few years. You think Thailand as well, flat. Hard braking, 90-degree corners. It's a problem that seems to exist in all motorsport now, is that we just get these boring circuits designed by architects that using maths instead of passion. And nobody can really seem to understand that isn't what's going to create good racing. You look at where are the places we get the best racing? It's Phillip Island, it's Mugello, it's those circuits with real character, fast flowing, using the kind of the landscape and some form or another. And Phillip Island's maybe the best example of that. Fast flowing, just everything. You've got all the unique setting. I think it plays such a factor in why we get such good races as well, with the way the wind blows through, the weather plays havoc. Think memories, think back to 2014 when you had people like Marc leading the race, and then it cools down crazy amounts when the sun disappears, and it was 2016 as well when Cal Crutchlow won, where it was a 10-degree shift every time the sun disappeared, and track temperature, and all these things combined to make Phillip Island brilliant. And it's always well timed, I think, in the season. If it's a championship year, it always adds something spicy. Last year we had obviously Marc versus Martin versus Pecco, which was great fun. The year before, of course, we had Johan Zarco, a race that Jorge Martin was about to win and could have made quite a big difference to his championship hopes. And his strategy gamble just didn't really work out. And either in the championship kind of situation, it throws up something. Think back to Marc in 2013 when Honda miscounted the amount of laps they had to do before they had to make a pit stop, and he got a weekend where he could have won the championship. It then meant that, as Pete said, the consequences, it meant we then had a final round showdown in Valencia with him and Lorenzo. You think just all these different races, even races when the championship isn't up for grabs, it just adds that bit of spice. We get to this point now where we're like, okay, there's not much to fight for anymore. And I think this year, championship's done. Battle for second is pretty much over at this point.
Yeah.
Battle for third is maybe where the excitement is, but let's face it. I know we're here to, as well as report on the championship, promote it in some sense, but who cares about a battle for third? No, it's not something we're going to remember even next year. Who finished third. Remember who finished third last year because it was Mark and because it was significant. But who finished third in 2023? I don't remember. 22, 21, 20. It just.
Who did
exactly
finish
my
third in
point. I'm sure there's a listener out there going, "Oh, well, it's this person."
It was Bezzecchi. It was Bezzecchi. That's who it was.
Well,
I remember that.
If you remember that, fair enough. But like,
I know what you mean.
It's like trying to sell tickets for a big concert based on the support band alone. It's not going to work. So yeah, it's quite well timed, and it just adds a bit of flavour, one way or the other. And yeah, it's just whatever happens, it will be exciting with, as you guys say, with the kind of main three guys from last year and from previous years. I think Maverick, almost won that race in 2019, was it? With
19
against Mark, he crashed. 18, 19, can't remember.
He won in 18, and then he nearly won in 19, but crashed the last lap.
So there's a guy with the injury problems, might have been looking at Phillip Island as a good weekend. Martin, of course. Probably, if had he been fit the past few rounds, had been here, Phillip Island looking at kind of being a place where he would really, everything would click for him. Mark, obviously, we know there. So it has blown those doors wide open for some new faces to come in. There's some faces further down. If you're Alex Rins, coming off the back of his best weekend as a Yamaha rider. Yep, slightly different circumstances this weekend compared to last weekend at Mandalika. But that confidence, Phillip Island is such a confident circuit. And if you've got that, someone like Fabio there, you could be looking at that as as an opportunity. Honda's been great, and if there's going to be a circuit that can really suit that Honda, but it seems to go well in the fast flow and stuff, then who knows? So there's a reason to get up at 4 a.m, or whatever horrible thing it is if you're a UK viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, just want to add this in. It's minimal ride usage as well, and that makes it so much better, I think. I mean, they can only really use it, I think. I don't know if some people were trying to use it in between the exit of Miller Corner, and then into the other Siberia. Some people were trying it last year, but it's so hard to do because it's not really worth it. And they can use it in the main straight, but then trying to get it pulled up is the hardest thing. And I think, yeah, it's a really good circuit just for racing, essentially. We'll get into each manufacturer, I think, and look at their prospects for the weekend. Pete, start with Aprilia. I mean, on paper, this should be really good for them, but it's circumstantial because they're coming off Bezzecchi, who's been so fast, but might be carrying a bit of an injury still, even just mentally, as you say, and also penalties probably coming. But can you look at the likes of maybe Raul Fernandez? Could he surprise? Because he did surprise in Indonesia.
Didn't he? Yeah. I mean, it's given there were only 2 Aprilias on the track for the sprint anyway, and then only one after lap 1 of the Grand Prix. You do wonder what could they have done if they were at full strength with all 4 of their riders fully fit. So Iagura as well, is a rider, good corner speed, that sort of smaller bike style, shall we say, it could suit him as well. And certainly the Aprilia, I think it's impressed, isn't it? They seem to have sort of fixed the deficiencies that it had, if you like, and they've still got this strength, it seems, with the high corner speed that in some of the years past, they seemed to lose it a little bit, didn't they? They went too far the one way to try and sort of get the braking better, and they sort of lost the strength. But this year it seems they've improved the braking, and they still do have this strength in the fast corners. So as you guys have been saying, Phillip Island's got loads of those. And Bezzecchi, there were people already, weren't there, in Indonesia talking about how he's going to be the guy to beat at Phillip Island. So it now remains to be seen. Same situation as his teammate Jorge Martin, in that he hasn't had this hearing yet for the incidents that he caused. So we don't know what the punishment will be yet. It's inevitable that he'll get something. I would have thought having an opening lap accident is where they clamp down on it, whatever the circumstances, because it is a dangerous situation when you've got so many other bikes on track. I suppose it is a bit of it's a sort of a unique situation in that if you sort of think, well, we don't know exactly when Mark was injured, but we sort of assume it was when he hit the gravel trap, wasn't it? So, it's almost, if Mark had fallen off the bike, hadn't had the gravel trap and just got up and walked away, it's one situation. Instead, he's got quite a nasty injury, as we now know, with the ligaments, with all the question marks about those. But you can't really blame Bezzecchi for the design of the gravel trap, can you? So it's interesting to see how they will judge that, but some form of penalty seems inevitable just because it was the opening lap and it was at such high speed that, if you have a high speed accident, obviously the chances of an injury are much higher. So, yeah, it's a shame for him that it's going to happen on the Sunday anyway. So the sprint, he'll be free to go for it. So I think, you sort of pencil him in as perhaps the guy to beat then. But Sunday, yeah, he's going to perhaps have to overcome, at least one long lap. Let's see. But that could make the racing even better. If we see Bez having to fight through again through the field, it could just add to the drama. So I think for Aprilia, they will look at this weekend, and coming back to your question, as certainly a target, because with Marc out, everybody's going to just sort of lift a little bit, aren't they? After being pummeled by Marc Marquez, basically round in, round out, race in, race out for all this year. Suddenly it's all up for grabs, isn't it? And there's a big question mark over Pecco still. Everybody else is going to now say, let's step up and go for this. And I think Aprilia certainly, they've turned around what began as a bit of a nightmare season, and they're having a really strong end to it. And I think this is a great chance for them.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the headmaster kind of disappears for a week and they're like, right, we can get away with a bit more here. Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the manufacturers will be looking at it, as you say, Pete, because it is a golden opportunity. Lewis, and we can look at Honda next. I think that's where I'm focusing on. Obviously, Pete says Zarco's won here in the past, obviously on a Ducati, but Honda have a bike now that can, essentially, from all their riders, they can really challenge at the front. The results of the past 5 rounds, I think there's been a Honda inside the top 6 in every single round, essentially, for the past 5. So it is a promising circuit for them as well on paper.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were looking at one rider from that Honda kind of stable, it's Joan Mir, personally for me, because you think, Joan Mir, Phillip Island is really where his Grand Prix career kind of kicked off. He was brought in at Leopard as a replacement in Moto3, and he was running well inside the top 5, I think, before he crashed out. And that was really the point where we're like, wow, this is a star of the future. And I think, with the confidence from Japan, with the performance of the bike, with I think this is, could be an opportunity for him. I think Zarco is the one on paper you would look at, but he hasn't gelled with these new updates so far. He spoke about this in Mandalika, where all the base settings he had on the bike to begin with, on the older version, let's say, where he was able to be so strong, haven't transferred over to the new part, so he's not got the same confidence. And Phillip Island's a confidence circuit, so unfortunately for Zarco, those updates kind of come at the wrong time, because a bit earlier, after the summer break, like when the factory riders got them and he was able to just adapt to them, then yeah, you'd be looking at Phillip Island. Zarco's big opportunity for potentially another Grand Prix win this season. So, but yeah, I mean, the whole Honda stable, sort of Chantra aside, has really upped its kind of game the second half of this season. I think the factory riders in particular both have very good opportunities here to do something pretty special.
Absolutely. And the same goes for KTM, I think, as well, Pete, doesn't it? It's hard to work out which bike and which spec of bike each KTM rider is on, but Acosta's, I'll give Binder his credit too. He had a really good race on Sunday in Indonesia. I think that the key for them is just, can the tyres with them, can they just make them last? Because Acosta was fighting like a dog, to be honest, in those last 5 laps of the Indonesian Grand Prix. That's obviously a strength of his, but around here, if you make the wrong tyre choice, and we've seen it with Jorge Martin, for example, it could come back and really bite you, can't it?
It can, yeah. We've seen Mark make it work, and a few times where he's gone with something different, but you have to really be tactically sort of aware, don't you, and basically slow the field down, yeah. And there's been a few times where even for Mark it's backfired, hasn't it? And he said, look, I can't do that pace, and he's just had to accept that he can't keep the pace back anymore, and it just hasn't worked for him. But it is somewhere that you can make a tire gamble. The famous Jorge Martin getting within 1 lap, wasn't it? Maybe if he'd have been a little bit more careful earlier on, he might have been okay. It's such a fine line between success and failure at Phillip Island. And going back to Brad Binder, and he was one of those that he also lost sight at the end of that race there, didn't he? He was right in that battle for the podium places, and ended up not being on the podium. when everything sort of shuffled out in those sort of chaotic last couple of laps. So, we know that Binder can be fast around there. As you say, it's the KTM. You're not quite sure that they seem to be building and building in the latter half of the European summer, shall we say, and then they sort of took a step back a bit, didn't they? And I think they're still trying to find out where they are with the bike again. But big shame Vinales, as you were highlighting, he's not going to be here because he is good around Phillip Island. And as you guys have been saying, it's a rider's track. So you almost look at the riders more than the bikes sometimes, don't you? We saw how Marc Marquez was able to make the Honda work even when it couldn't at other tracks, etc. So I think Maverick, if he was fully fit, would have been one, certainly in contending for a podium this weekend. Real shame for him that his injuries aren't going to allow that. So, Acosta, he's going to be desperate, isn't he, to get up there, get that first win. He's had to stand next to Fermin Aldeguer on the podium, hasn't he, and see someone come in and win as a rookie. And as we were saying, with Mark now out of the picture, I think Acosta's going to fancy his chances of at least, if the bike is good enough, of at least going up there and doing what Aldeguer has done. So let's see. We did hear that the KTM has kind of lost some of its braking strength. And maybe he's a bit better on the flowing corners, which could actually help it at Phillip Island, couldn't it? It's been a problem for them at some tracks where they haven't been able to. The stop and go tracks have been more difficult than maybe they expected. Maybe it's the other side of the coin, and that the bike will sort of work better at Phillip Island. But I think, as I say, you go with the riders, and I think you'd see, Binder's not got the confidence back. Acosta, as we know, as you were saying then, great defensive battle there, wasn't it, that he did it in Indonesia, and that's kind of the thing you can do at Phillip Island, especially if he needs to take. We saw the KTM; they couldn't run the same front tire as the other guys, could they? So again, he might find himself in that situation again, where they're not able to run the medium; they've got to go hard or soft, and he's going to need all of those skills again. But if he can qualify well and kind of dictate the pace of the race, I think Acosta can definitely be a contender. Yeah.
Yeah, like to hope so. I think last year he had a big crash in the sprint and he actually missed the Grand Prix from memory. Yeah, so I think he was pretty fast last year from memory before he crashed. So potentially I think, Costa could be the guy, I think, just to seize on the opportunity that Mark's not here. And the same for Binder as well. I think he went well here in the lower classes too, but MotoGP, I think he's kind of struggled and he's kind of had a good year and he's had a bad year, but maybe this could be the year that he can find something. And of course Pol Espargaro's in for Maverick Vinales too. I mean, Pol does a good job anyway, but let's see what he can do when he gets to Phillip Island. I think it's a circuit that he loves as well. So yeah, Bastianini is hard for me to really predict what's going to happen with him, because since his podium at, where was his last podium? Brno? Or no, where did Bastianini score podium? Was it Barcelona? Yeah, Barcelona. Since then, his results have dropped off massively. So, yeah, we'll see there what happens with them. Yamaha, Lewis, Fabio Quartararo got an awful record around here. Like, even since his first MotoGP race, it was really. I mean, it got two corners and then Danilo Petrucci took him out, but it's never been a circuit for him that's really gelled.
No, and that's slightly surprising, given given how Fabio rides. He's fast, flowing, aggressive, and the Yamaha for a long time has worked quite well around Phillip Island. The grip around Phillip Island's good. Top speed is one thing, but the kind of the problems of the Yamaha, in the hands of a rider that can make the difference. And we know Phillip Island is very much a difference maker circuit, let's say. Really, Fabio should probably have a couple of wins under his belt around Phillip Island, but as you say, just luck hasn't been on his side for one reason or another, and then, it just hasn't really worked out. But, you'd have to at least factor him in for qualifying this week. If there's one track where, an all-out kind of balls to the wall qualifying effort's going to get you far, it's Phillip Island, and Fabio is the master at that. And if the Yamaha can qualify well with the kind of tendency for pack races, that type of thing, pace getting slowed up, because yes, there's a big long straight where the top speed of the Yamaha might suffer a bit, but it is from a sort of third, fourth gear, kind of long left-hand corner. So in theory, that shouldn't kind of upset it shouldn't keep the Yamaha out the game, let's say. So if they can qualify well and Fabio can ride, the way that we know he can ride, then again, they will have to look at that as an opportunity. There is a good opportunity here for Yamaha to come away with something decent, much, like I mentioned with Alex Rins. Obviously the home fans will be looking at Jack Miller on the Prime Out bike. We haven't really seen much from Jack for a while now, certainly compared to what we saw earlier in the season. So if there, he's now secured Prime Out future for next year, it would be good to see him, get a result that kind of, that warrants that, let's say. He's had a good season up till now, but, it's time we see him on his home track do something, reasonably special. We know he's been on the podium, a few times, as Jack, so he knows his way around. So, yeah, we are looking at this, I think, as a weekend where you can't really rule out anyone. For one reason or other. This is a racetrack that plays into everyone's strengths and also everyone's weaknesses as well, in a sense as well. Every bike's weakness kind of gets exposed a little bit at Phillip Island as well as its strengths. So then it becomes about the rider, and that's why we get these great races at Phillip Island.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe last year, Ralph Fernandez, and we'll go back to the Aprilia stuff. Aprilia actually said to him, run without wings for data purposes to collect. So I wonder if it gets really windy and on the point where it's better to take them off. I wonder if we'll see anyone try it without. It'd be interesting because I don't know. Fernandez said the bike felt completely different. He felt more free on it. It felt just natural compared to the Aero. But then a lot of teams say that the Aero actually helps in instances like this, especially on the main straight. So yeah, every bike has its strengths and every bike has its weakness, obviously, but I think the Yamaha, it could be a good weekend for them. Like Alex Rins is, I think, the one you want to watch here, just to see, because he's won here in the past, and maybe he can continue the strong form. What do we think for Pecco and Ducati's chances? Is it a case of, can we even really predict it anymore, or are we just looking at the other Ducati riders, aka Aldegar, Alex Marquez, Di Giannantonio, Morbidelli, to be the guys that'll really charge towards the front?
Well, they've been more consistent, haven't they? But yeah, I mean, it's almost FP1, isn't it? At Phillip Island is going to be, all the cameras are going to be on what's Pecco going to feel on this bike? What bike is he going to be on even? Will he have one of each spec of these sort of different, the older spec, shall we say, and the previous GP25 spec? Will he just stick with what he had? Will he go back to what Mark was using? We really don't know yet, and obviously I'm sure he'll already be sick of the questions he's going to get about what he's using. But I mean, it's the obvious talking point, because when he's on form, as we saw in Motegi, nobody could touch him. I think probably, almost certainly actually, if Mark hadn't had a title at stake, they would have, Mark would have been up there with him. But even so, that would still have been a massive step for Pecco compared with what we'd seen at the previous rounds, just to be, giving Mark some competition. So we don't know. Could he be the Motegi Pecco? Is it the Mandalika, the Misano Pecco? We really don't know yet. We're hearing even that it is the ride height device. They seem to think is the centre of the issues here. But then that throws up a whole other load of questions, doesn't it? Because if it was, let's say, the activation of the ride height device, well, they only do that, and we were just saying about it at Phillip Island, once or twice a lap. So that would, if that was the case, then the other sectors Pecco would be fine in. But we haven't seen that really. We've seen him losing out when he's been struggling. He's sort of been losing out in most sectors, or sometimes he's been, the best sectors have been the ones where he's using the ride height device, with the straights on and things like that. So it's so complicated to try and work out where this problem lies. And is it, as we've said previously, that the ride height device means there's a different chassis, there's a different weight balance needed, and it's that's causing the discomfort rather than actually the movement of the bike, when it engages or disengages under braking. We really don't know, and it's just such a mystery that his problems that seem to disappear at the Misano test in Motegi suddenly come back in Indonesia at Mandalika. So yeah, what's Phillip Island going to throw up? And as you guys have quite rightly said, it's a confidence track, and Pecco's confidence must be rock bottom at the moment, because he just doesn't know what he's going to feel each time he leaves the pits. I'd imagine it's such a strange one at Ducati, isn't it? When you think back, it's quite unusual. The riders that, certainly the factory, I suppose, factory spec riders, they either get on with the bike or they don't. They either work it out within sort of 5 or 6 rounds, they make a step around the Jerez test, they get a setup that works, and then they're competitive. Or they kind of never get that bike to work for them. You think Bastianini a couple of years back and things like that. It's quite rare that a Ducati rider actually fixes or suddenly clicks late in a season with a bike. They kind of got to wait for the following year, don't they? We don't really see progressions come early on, or they don't come at all. That's kind of been the pattern that we've seen with the Ducatis. I suppose Digia with his first year with Frankie Carcetti was the exception when he won that late race in Qatar. But then obviously that was the change, was working with a different crew chief, and they had a whole different plan. So that kind of explains that. But in terms of trying to get a rider to suit a bike, it's almost like if they don't sort it out within 5 or 6 races, the riders just have to kind of get through the rest of that season. I can't think of anyone kind of transforming late on in the year, if you know what I mean, and suddenly clicking and winning races and having had a really bad start to the year. So yeah, I mean, really, Pecco's just got to try and find some direction for 26, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Lewis, just before we end the podcast, out of the other Ducati riders, is this Alex Marquez's chance here to stamp second place officially, really, just to get it out the way, because it's a real opportunity for him. But I don't think his record's that great around Phillip Island, from just looking.
Off the top of my head, I think he can mathematically wrap up second in the championship this weekend. I think he needs to... Oh, hang on a minute. I wrote this the other day and I've completely forgotten. Hang on, let me see if I can find it. I owe the listeners that much.
I think he needs to be on the podium.
If he manages to be... He's 88 points clear now, so if he's 111 points clear at the end of this Australian Grand Prix weekend, then that is second in the championship. So it will require kind of a couple of podiums and for Pecco to have a bit of a bad weekend, which, let's face it, isn't out of the question, because we don't know, as you guys have spoken about, what version of Pecco we get. And yeah, I think Alex Marquez has to look at this. He's with his teammate now is a race winner, and for all of this season we've looked at the kind of second best Ducati being Alex. He needs to make sure that trend doesn't show signs of changing, as the kind of final few races of this season go on, because for next year, okay, Alex is going to go to a factory bike, so there's going to be a slightly different step between the two of them. But Alex was given that factory bike because he was the top performer of those satellite Ducatis. If all of a sudden, end of this year and then start next year, Fermin Aldeguer is the one who's doing all the winning at Gresini and doing all the top results, then that's going to harm Alex's chances of maybe vying for a factory team place in 27. It's going to redraw the battle line somewhat in terms of if Ducati if they're going to carry on with what they're doing next year with having 4 factory bikes of the 6, they might go, okay, well, Alex, you haven't earned it for 27, so we're going to give it to Fermin. There's a lot of pride at stake there, really, and I think Alex needs to get that kind of overturned and get back to, Mandalika wasn't a great weekend for him and he salvaged it. It was a weekend very much, in some senses, consequential for Fermin Aldeguer. The stiffer tire construction has been fast on. If you think back to Austria, for example, that was another weekend that Alex Marquez wasn't brilliant, and Fermin was. So, I think we maybe see it kind of go back to normal, but there is a little bit more pressure there on Alex now to, get back to where he needs to be and to prove that he is that second best Ducati. I would be looking at someone like Digia as well. A podium here at Phillip Island a few years ago. It's a good circuit for him. This is going to be an interesting one for Ducati because, yes, they can rely on someone like Alex Marquez. Yes, they had Fermin Aldeguer win in Indonesia, but with Mark out and Pecco AWOL and Digia's form up and down on the GP25, there could very well be a situation here where we get a glimpse at what a Marc Marquez-less factory Ducati season this year looks like, or could have looked like. Yeah. Yes, Ducati. Whatever happened, Marc wasn't here. Ducati wins the championship. Alex Marquez takes over. Fair enough, but with you don't want to develop a factory bike and have your guys on factory Jorge Martin was on a factory contract. This is the thing. Last year he was on a factory contract. He was essentially for all intents and purposes, a factory Ducati rider who won the championship. If you end up in a situation where a guy you didn't deem, well, let's face it, good enough to be on a factory contract, certainly over his young teammate, and okay, Fairman's factory contract is pennies, really. It's not a very big factory contract, but he's contracted to Ducati. There's a bit of honour in that. If you're in a situation where your top guy who wins the championship is not even not even contracted to you, he just rides. Yeah. He's just hired to ride one of your bikes. He's a session musician essentially, compared to the rock superstars of your factory team. That's not a great look. And I think that's something Ducati might well kind of see this weekend if Pecco doesn't come back. And then going forward, there is that situation where if Pecco has a rubbish weekend, Fabio Di Giannantonio has a rubbish weekend, Marc Marquez's contract negotiations for 2027 with Ducati all of a sudden have a few more zeros added onto it, because rightly his management can go, well, here are all the examples where if our guy wasn't on one of your bikes, you're not coming away with anything. And so that's, Ducati has shied away from big money contracts since COVID. If they're going to, we don't really know actually what Marc's contract is for this year. We assume it's not huge, and we assume Pecco is still the higher paid of them. But Pecco's contract, I think he still, even with all the win bonuses, still earns half of what Fabio Quartararo earns at Yamaha. And this is a double world champion, so all of a sudden that's going to then that there is, as Pete's talked about, consequences. Phillip Island, everything, it might seem inconsequential at the time, will have bigger effect, consequences later down the line. I think that could be one of them. This could be the weekend where Marc Marquez's 27 contract talks with Ducati take a very interesting kind of step forward.
I actually didn't really think about the whole prospect of, you say it. It puts Ducati in a really weird position, because the markless weekend is just like the real eye test, and it's like, jeez, if this doesn't go well, you're spot on. Marquez's team will go like, well, we did tell you he is the guy here, sort of thing. So yeah, that'll be a key watch for everyone, I think. So yeah, let's see what Ducati do. I mean, it's not been a disaster. They won 16 out of 18 races this year, so if they lose this one, I don't think it's going to be a big thing. But it might be. Who knows? They might be at the end of their tether with this 25, and we'll see what direction it goes for the next few rounds. But yeah,
I don't think that's who they're going to be at the end of their tether with. I know. Yeah. Well,
it's a bike on something that's on it. They might be a bit annoyed at. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, Marc Marquez surgery just confirmed this morning. Yeah, we'll see what happens there. I don't even want to predict this weekend. Let us enjoy it, please. I think if we get a real up and down weekend, who knows? Someone completely out of the blue might win, and it will be the best surprise for us to talk about in the next podcast. If you enjoyed this one, like, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple and Spotify. See you next week. Let's hope it's a good one.